ambiguous level of for emotion. And for motivation, almost the same. English showed quite a strong consensus group, while Japanese showed very close to an ambiguous level of consensus group for motivation. And photo H, for emotion, English showed a quite strong consensus group, while Japanese showed a very close to ambiguous level of consensus group. Conclusion, Japanese were more likely to evaluate HDAV by vocal expressions, while English were more likely to evaluate HDAV by visual expressions. It appeared that English were more likely to perceive subtle signs of dogs, the result from the potential cause of HDAV and dogs' emotion and motivation, which may be related to describing HDAV more than Japanese. The study indicated that a cultural factor, language, influenced people's perceptions of HDAV. There are issues to be addressed, such as the greater number of English language book owners and limited circumstances of HDAV. Therefore, further research would be useful to identify the relationship between broadly demographic factors as cultural influences and perception of HDAV in various circumstances. Thank you very much for listening. Any questions? I especially appreciate for my supervisors to support me and my research, and also my friends too. Thank you.
It was actually a negative relationship with interaction. So the less time you're going to spend with the dog, the more of
that variation between dogs as opposed to within the dog. Again, we found no effective physiology, and that is contrary to the abstract, because once we actually included in that nested design, then the correlation effect that we found in the abstract disappeared. We did, though, then find that consistent effect of activity and also an effect of several CBARC behavioural categories. No effect of time spent, though. So let's just have a look at those direct effects a little bit closer. Activity was positively related with overall welfare and physical health, but not mental state. But the CBARC behavioural problem categories were associated with the mental state. So aggression, fear, and attachment, dogs that showed these scored lower on the mental state ratings. So to summarize that, essentially day-to-day changes within an individual dog's activity levels led to small changes in the welfare perceptions of owners. There was no direct effect of physiological measures, but there was that odd moderating effect that we can think a bit more about. In general, more active dogs were perceived to have better overall welfare and physical health, and dogs with behavioural problems were perceived to have poorer mental health. So then we have to just ask ourselves, okay, why did we only see A, weak relationships, and B, no relationships in many of the situations with the physiological measures? So first we need to think, well, are these measures just not reflective of welfare? But that would kind of fly in the face of a significant body of evidence. So I'm going to cross that one out. More likely, I would think, is that while we did see variability in the dog's metrics over the 2 weeks, day to day, perhaps these changes are just within a sort of normal range and don't actually reflect a change in welfare state. So to understand this better, we need some more basic research to develop reference ranges for that sort of thing. And finally, it could be that these changes do reflect welfare changes, welfare state changes, but that the owners, the things that are visible to the owners just were too subtle for them to pick up, or they don't know what to be looking for. So I think we can safely conclude that owner perceptions capture some of the picture, but not all of it. So what this means for our interventions, perhaps unsurprisingly to everyone, owner perceptions of welfare could likely do with some improvement, particularly for those less extreme welfare changes. One thing we need to figure out though is, do owners not know what to look for, or do they just not notice? And we've got a master's project starting on this at the moment. And finally, we need to think about and refine, what can we actually teach owners to look for other than just activity? What specific behaviours should they be looking out for? Because if we can do this, then hopefully we can help improve the lives of our furry friends. Thank you so much for listening. Just acknowledge my supervisors, Graham Coleman, Paul Hemsworth, Lauren Hemsworth, and Heidi Ortmeyer. Statistical Consulting. For some reason, the U4 logo isn't popping up there, but U4 did help fund it, and the RSPCA Australia. And thank you so much to Purina for assisting in me being here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very dynamic and interesting talk. Oh, yes, there is a first question.
Hello, I'm François. I'm from Nestle Purina. Could you elaborate a little bit more about how you use the hair cortisol? Because if I saw you took the sample just once, right? How did you use it?
Yeah, so we haven't actually analysed the hair samples yet, purely because we haven't been able to get into the lab. So it will be coming, so stay tuned for that. But yes, we would have liked to do a reshave procedure, like a lot of papers use. But unfortunately, this wasn't possible because after 2 weeks, there wouldn't be enough hair grown back to reshave. And also we found a couple of papers that suggested that just for a baseline measure, a single shave was sufficient.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have another question? No? I have some. Some technical question maybe first. Your collar are working for any type of dogs, or because that could be small, or and very often it's not the same way to capture the signal and so on. So could you answer this first question?
Yeah, absolutely. So the collars do come in different sizes. So for small, medium and large dogs, they don't work for dogs under 4 kilos. So that was a constraint that we put on the recruitment. I did find some dogs and some dog breeds, as you say, the signal was just not very good. And something that I didn't have a chance to present today was we did a lot of data validation work on the frequency of sampling, because while it says that it will sample every 2 minutes, it often doesn't, because it won't get a strong signal enough. So we had to do a fair amount of work to kind of develop criteria as to, okay, how many measurement points within a certain amount of time is a valid measurement. But yeah, as far as between small, medium and large, I didn't find many differences between how they worked with regards to that.
we have 1 minute left, so if you want to move to the other session at the moment. I have another question about heart rate. Heart rate variability can depend on the activity of the dog. For sports, that could be different, the way the heart is. So could it be possible that some non-relationship or relationship could depend on the individual history of dogs? And then what you are expecting from heart rate could vary depending on each activity of each dog.
Absolutely. So two sort of answers to that. First of all, when I looked at heart rate variability and activity, there wasn't a significant correlation between them. So we use 24-hour heart rate variability measures, so SDNN, SDANN, SDNNI, because they sort of get rid of some of that noise of the activity levels and that sort of thing. So first of all, we didn't find a significant relationship between activity and heart rate variability. Secondly, yes, there is, of course, going to be differences between dogs, and that's why I was interested in that daily change. So we'll kind of, in a way, sort of using the dog as its own control, seeing if there was changes day to day within that dog, and then how that related to changes in their owner's perception.
Okay, thank you. No more question? Okay, so I think we can move to the next. Thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, Sarah, I hope this will work this time. Could you help our presenter? It's the same problem. Which one? Next presentation, and we will go on. Okay. So now our next presentation will be from Catherine Eriksson, if I am right. Okay. I hope it will be okay. And the title of your presentation will be Country of Origin Influence Management Practices and Attitudes Toward Triplet-Born Lambs. And you are from SIUC.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's good to talk about sheep as well on this section. So I'm digging right into it because what's the problem with triplets? That's what my supervisor always said, so what? So producing triplet lambs has the potential to improve sheep farming productivity. And in the past decades, the increased focus on management practices and fertility in sheep has actually increased the number of lambs born per year. But the issue is with increasing lambs and increasing number of triplet lambs born is the increase in higher mortality rates, which is a huge welfare issue. Because triplet lambs suffer about 25 to 40% of mortality, whereas compared to singles, there's perhaps less than 10%. And as you can see on the references, these are old, but nothing has changed, and there really has to be a change. But what are farmers actually thinking about this issue? Do they want triplets? Do they adjust their management practice accordingly? And that was what this survey was about, but there's so much to talk about, so I can't tell you everything, but you're more than welcome to ask me. So my objective was therefore for today but to investigate the factors that influence management practices and the attitudes to financial cost associated with triplet-bearing ewes and their offspring. To do this, we, Chaggis from the Republic of Ireland, AgResearch from New Zealand, and SIC and the University of Edinburgh, we together developed an online quantitative survey in which we developed 34 questions, and these covered demographics, questions about the farming system, about how they manage their ewes and their lambs, of course. And then we had many questions about attitudes, among others, also what they were thinking about the resources they had and also the welfare. But again, I can't tell you everything, so I'm going with cost benefit this time. So as you can see, we distributed this online, and we did this by social media and mainstream media. So some of these clippings you see here was to ask farmers what they were thinking. To go into the nitty-gritty stuff, how did I analyze this? I used descriptive statistics to investigate trends in the data, and that's how I found out that countries were really different. I was, to be honest, in the beginning more interested in the lambing system, because I thought if you lamb indoors, you will probably have a completely different opinion about things if you lamb outdoors. But now I found out that country was a huge factor that was playing into the respondents' attitudes and practices. But to investigate that, I developed best practice scores. It was a way to kind of collate all these answers and to create a management practice variables, or so an additive variable that could tell me what influences these management practices, and kind of find out what is actually important here, what management practices are needed for triplet lambs to survive. So I went to the literature while developing the survey, and then also while I developed these best practice scores to find out what farmers need to know and have to do. And you will see that on the next slide. For the attitudinal questions, I used the PCA, so principal component analysis, to identify groupings in these questions and create variables. And lastly, I used linear mixed models to investigate factors. So my best practice scores, and this gets really sheepy. So I developed two best practice scores. One was on pregnancy and one was on the lambs. And you could score a count of 7 for the pregnancy practice and a score of 6. So basically, did you do it? Yes, you got a score. Did you not do it? You got a 0. And to score a score of 7, you had to do pregnancy scanning to figure out how many fetuses your ewe was having. And you should body condition score your ewes, so you always track on if she's too slim or overweight. You should feed according to litter size, because we know that a lot of fetuses take up a lot of nutrition. And you should also manage according to body condition score. Keeping the ewes in separate groups could also help you to manage your ewes, and of course frequent inspections, because triplet bearing ewes are more vulnerable. And also supplementing in the last 4 to 6 weeks. I was aware of that no farmer can be perfect and no system can be perfect. So, but that was not the purpose of these scores. For the triplet lamb practice scores, I wanted the farmers to move their ewes and lambs to a pen after birth, and I wanted to provide them with shelter. So these ones can be a bit like counteractive, because what does a farmer do when he's outside? But I tried to take that into account by saying you can also give them shelter, because we know by science that will help as well. And you should assist lambs that are hungry, and you should assist them by holding them to the udder. And your first choice of supplement should be ewe colostrum and not artificial colostrum or cow colostrum, which is also could be a practice for some farmers. And hourly or several inspections should also be done. And the pregnancy and the triplet lamb practice would then give you a total best practice score, which is the one I will present here. So this survey was then distributed from November 19 to March 20, and I had 448 participants taking part in my survey. And the social scientist who was connected, she was almost, popping bottles, because it was such a good number. You never get farmers to do anything, especially not sheep farmers. So it was amazing, especially because it was online. So that was really, really good. And here are some of the demographic results and then the total best practice score, just to put them kind of in relation to each other, because everything is intertwined. What I found, not surprisingly, New Zealand sheep farmers have bigger, New Zealand respondents had bigger farms, so bigger flocks of ewes. And also only 5% of New Zealand respondents lambed indoors, whereas Irish sheep farmers in this survey mostly lambed indoors. I also asked them how many sets of triplets they were having. And as you can see here, it was significant, and that my New Zealand respondents had about 11% of all their lambs, so litters, born in that season. So that would be their 2019 season, had 11% of their litters were born with triplets. And then the lamb mortality, as you can see here, it was not significant, but I still want to raise the numbers because it also highlights some of the management practices here. You can see that New Zealand respondents have about 25% of their lambs dying in that season. And that could connect firstly to they lamb outdoors. We know by science that outdoor lambing has higher lamb mortality, but they also have bigger flocks, so a harder time to manage their lambs. And they have more triplets. You can, well, if you say 2,000 ewes lambing, 10% of their lambs are triplets, you can count a lot of lambs that are triplets. But what you also can see here, to put it in perspective with the total best practice score, is that they also have a lower score. So just to remind you, the highest number they could get was 13. So there's a far way ahead to score 13 if you have a score of 5.8. What I also want to raise is that the UK respondents were kind of like the in-betweener. So they had 61% of their flocks respondents were lambing indoors, but they also had the best practice scores. So it does kind of show you perhaps that outdoor systems in the UK system of these respondents are doing something different than a New Zealand respondent would do. I found it really hard to make such a nice presentation as the previous one, because I find PCAs are really hard to present in a pretty way. But I had 9 questions that highlighted financial cost. And then I used the PCA to see what factors I could find in here. And these 3 factors I found, which I named pregnancy management, triplet management, and losses, accounted for, do you see that? No, you don't. But they accounted for 19% and 19% and 16% of the variance explained. But what you see here are all the 9 questions I asked. And you can see here that pregnancy management accounted for the cost of pregnancy scanning, which could for some farmers be too expensive, and also the feeding of the pregnant ewe during pregnancy. Cost of staff could be a huge issue in sheep farming. Previous research has shown that is the biggest issue because sheep farming is so seasonal and finding staff is really hard. It's a one-man job mostly, or family job. So finding staff in that period can be really expensive. And next up was supplementing the ewes again, could be quite expensive. So you see here the loadings. For the triplet management, you saw that working hours again, as I explained, was one of that factor, and artificially rearing, which is used by some farmers. They could take a lamb off the ewe and then feed it on milk replacer, so to speak. And also the overall cost of triplet lamb management was too high, but was also added in that factor. And lastly, the losses factor included the cost of lamb mortality and ewe mortality. So showing the results individually for each factor is that firstly, related to management practices, I didn't mention that this was on a Likert scale. So 1 is strongly disagree, and 3 is like, I don't really know. And 5 is I strongly agree. But here you see, this was not significant, but they kind of disagreed and neither disagreed. But relation to cost of triplets, I found a significant find where New Zealand farmers were mostly relating to that they didn't think that triplet costs were too high, and that could be related to the best practice scores, that they were just not using as many resources perhaps to actually take care of the lambs. and attitudes.
We have to come at the end.
Okay. Last one, losses. New Zealand farmers definitely saw lamb losses and ewe losses as the biggest issue in their farming system, which could also relate to the results I showed you before. And lastly, I just want to show the last slide that country of origin is the result here, but there's so many other things that are affecting this. Social norms, attitudes to welfare, their backgrounds of these respondents, lamb mortality, environment. There's so much more you should look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You were perfectly in time. I was not sure. Sorry to have disturbed you. Do you have any question? Yes.
I just wondered, Björn Falkman from Denmark. I was just wondering, did you look at the outdoor farmers in the UK compared to outdoor farmers in New Zealand? So trying to exclude the country effect and just look at the...
I couldn't exclude the country effect. I just didn't have the sample size to do that. That was the biggest issue. And I just couldn't exclude it. It was overtaking everything.
Okay, thanks.
Well, thanks for that question, because what further I found was that the farming systems are different, and UK farmers are definitely taking care of their lambs in a completely different way than they are in New Zealand. We also have to take into account that New Zealand invented the easy care system and put it in their breeding system in the 60s, that ewes should be able to take care of their lambs alone. They should give birth to them and they should rear them alone. But what they didn't take account was triplets. And that is probably one of the social norms here, that they are still really much hands off, and that might be the issues why they see high lamb mortality.
Okay, thank you. Another question? Okay. Okay. The question is, hi, what could explain the difference of perception between the two cultures?
Yes. I tried to, yes, really good question. I tried to, because easy care system in New Zealand is quite intertwined in the culture of New Zealand, that could be quite a big issue there. But what I didn't talk about here, for example, was also age of farmers. For example, which was an effect here. So my Irish farmers, for example, were a much older age group, which could explain adapting to new methods, technology as well, whereas my New Zealand farmers were really young.
Okay, thank you. You can move to the other session if you want, we have time. I have a question for myself. I made a survey a bit similar to what you did, but there was, for example, gender issue.
Yes.
And the interaction between gender issue and the size of the farm. And I wanted to know if you investigated what was the attitude of women compared to men, and if it also depending on the size of the farm.
I actually didn't look at women and men and accordingly to the size of the farm, but yes, I found a sex effect that female respondents in this survey were definitely scoring much higher on the best practice score for the triplet lambs, but not on the pregnancy management. That could be the case if the pregnancy management is quite technical, apparently, so putting men and women quite much in boxes. Sorry about that. But also in my welfare questions, which I haven't covered here, females were definitely also seeing lambs having more pain in relationship to these questions. So yeah, there's definitely a sex effect there, which we should take much more into account, because it is a family business for many farms, and it is primarily the mum or the wife that perhaps takes care of these lambs.
Okay, thank you very much for your talk. So, for a third time, it's a running gag, we say. Okay, so we hope Sarah will present us a presentation named Factors Associated with Owner-Perceived Behavioral Problems in Dogs Enrolled in a Longitudinal Study. Are training methods important?
Hello, thank you for your patience. Thank you for having me here in Macedonia. My name is Sarah Kaczak-Arstecka, and I'm a part of research team at Dogs Trust. Dogs Trust is one of the largest animal welfare and the largest dog welfare charity in the UK. And I'm going to talk about factors associated with owner-perceived behavior problems in a cohort of dogs. We do know that if we want to simplify factors that shape dog behavior, we know that they can be divided into unmodifiable risk factors, so things that we can't do much about when the dog is born, such as genes, their age, health, and pain, and also modifiable risk factors, including early and ongoing life socialization, social relations with dogs and people, the diet, and training approaches, as well as other factors too. What we know much less about is factors that may shape dog owners' perception of dog behavior. And we have noted in one of the earlier studies that use this cohort data that there is a significant discrepancy between number and percentages of owners who mention that their dog displays behavior that might be found problematic, such as jumping up or mouthing, and the number or percentage of owners who consider these behaviors as a problem. And we don't quite know what are the kind of factors that shape owners' resilience in response to behavioral problems. We think it might be to do with owners' personality, as well as prior experience with dogs and their expectations regarding dog behavior and dog management. Bear with me as I scroll. So in this study, we wanted to explore the consistency of training approaches used by dog owners when the dog was between the age of 12 weeks and 12 months, evaluate the consistency of owner-reported behavior during this time period, and identify risk factors associated with owner-reported problematic behavior at 12 months. Data for this study come from Generation Pup. Generation Pup is a longitudinal study, and we are aiming to recruit 10,000 dogs. And this is Maddie. She was our 6,000th recruit. We recruit dogs of any breed and crossbreeds, as long as they are 16 weeks or younger at the time of recruitment, or 21 weeks if they enter the UK for quarantine. And the study is restricted to the UK. And we collect data via owner-completed surveys, vet cards, clinical records, and non-invasive biological samples. And if you want to find out about methodology, come to chat to us or scan this QR code. So for this study, we've extracted data from a number of surveys. Training-related data were extracted by a question, thinking about my puppy training I intend to use or I use. And we've extracted data from About My Puppy survey, which is completed on within 1 week of enrollment, from the 12 and 16-week surveys, which we later combine into one because some dogs joined after 12 weeks, from 9-month survey and from the 12-month survey. And dog demographic data were extracted from About My Puppy survey. Dog owners demographic data were extracted from About Me survey, which is also completed on registration. The behavior data were also extracted from a number of surveys, and we've asked a question, my puppy is showing behavior that I find a problem. And we only considered yes or no answers for the purpose of this analysis. And we've extracted this data from the settling in survey, which was completed within 1 week of enrollment, from the 12 or 16-week survey, from the 6-month survey, 9-month survey, and from the 12-month survey. We've also asked dog owners to complete a personality questionnaire. We've used the International Personality Item Pool 50 questionnaire, which collects data on big five personality traits of dog owners. The response options in the question about dog training overlap very neatly onto conditioning, operant conditioning quadrants. So the response options included things like we use food rewards, we tell our dog off, we use timeout, we use physical manipulation. But because owners used a combination of different methods, we had to reclassify it in a slightly complex way, so bear with me. We classified owners as training their dogs using rewards only if they used one or more positive reinforcement or negative punishment, and no positive punishment or negative reinforcement methods. And we've classified owners as using rewards and aversive methods, weak contrast if they used one positive punishment or negative reinforcement and one or more positive reinforcement and negative punishment. And we've classified training as reward and aversive strong contrast if more than one positive punishment or negative reinforcement method was selected, and one or more positive reinforcement or negative punishment. And we've classified aversive only if owners only reported using positive punishment or negative reinforcement and none of the other methods. However, as at every single time point, we didn't have more than 10 owners who used aversive only methods, that response was excluded from further analysis. And to evaluate the significance and change between time points with respect to the proportion of dogs reported to show problematic behavior and the proportion of dogs reported to be trained with a given approach, we've used binomial models with 2 key tests for multiple comparisons. And in order to evaluate factors related to owner-reported problematic behaviors at 12 months, we constructed 2 logistic regression models, one for the whole data set and the other one for the subset of dogs where we had owners' personality data. The outcome variable in both of these models was reported problematic behavior at 12 months. And the predictive variables that we've included in both models were owner demographics data and experience with dogs, dog acquisition factors, dog demographics, training approaches, as well as change in training approaches between time points and reported problematic behavior at previous time points. And in addition, in the second model, we've included owners' personality scores. So what did we find? We found that compared to the early survey that owners completed, significantly more owners were training their dogs with aversive training methods than intended. And the difference was also significant between 9 and 12 months, but not between 16 weeks and 9 months. So with every time point, greater number of owners, greater proportion of owners was training the dogs using the most aversive approach that we recorded in the study. Oops, sorry, I got excited here. And we've also found that with every single time point, there was an increase in number of owners who reported that their dog showed behavior that they found problematic. However, the difference was significant, statistically significant, only between settling in survey, which was completed within 1 week of registration, and the 12/16 week surveys, and between 9 and 12 months. Our regression models showed that the likelihood of an owner reporting their dog to show problematic behavior increased if they reported their dog to show problematic behavior at any of the previous time points, so at 12 or 16 weeks, 6 and 9 months, and if they changed the training approach to a more aversive training approach between 9 and 12 months, compared to change to a less aversive approach or maintenance of the same approach. We also found in the other model that included dog owners' personality data, we found again that the likelihood of owner reporting problematic behavior at 12 months increased if problematic behavior was reported at any of the previous time points, but also if the owner declared themselves to be first-time dog owner compared to having previous experience of dog ownership during adulthood. And if they said that they haven't seen pup's mother during acquisition, which might be a proxy for acquiring a dog that had slightly different early life experience than dogs that were acquired in a context where dog owner did see dog's mother. And we also identified that there was a slight increase in the likelihood of an owner reporting problematic behavior if the owner scored higher on the openness personality trait. So how do we interpret these findings? We think that what we've noted is that owners use much more aversive training approaches than intended, as they declared in the first survey. We also think that the switch towards more aversive training approaches might be a response towards owners trying to manage behaviors associated with dogs' adolescence. We know from some previous research that during adolescence, which occurs in dogs at different time points depending on their size and breed, dog behavior deteriorates in terms of their obedience and recall. So it might be that owners are struggling with this and kind of reverting to a more and more aversive approach. As I mentioned, we've identified that the previous studies identified that inadequate early life environment is a risk factor for fear-related behavior in dogs. And it could be that dogs that were acquired without seeing mother were kind of bred in an environment that wasn't as optimal as kind of home environment. Owners' prior experience with dogs may shape their expectation, but also how they manage their dog. And some previous studies identified a positive correlation between owners' openness trait and dog hair cortisol concentration, indicative of sort of long-term stress. It could be that high scores on openness trait might be linked with owners' management styles. Those owners may be less likely to kind of follow consistent training and consistent socialization rules, which they also might interpret dog behavior differently. They might be more likely to report dog behavior as a problem. Our study has a number of limitations. Generation pup is a very intensive exercise for dog owners, so our owners might not be representative of a broader population. Very few dog owners in our study relied on aversive training methods alone. And we also only analyzed whether an owner reported a problem behavior or not. We didn't actually differentiate between number of problem behaviors that were reported, but we hope to look into it in the future. So the takeaway message is that it's important to manage dog owners' expectations regarding dog behavior, especially during adolescence, and especially if they haven't owned a dog before. And the change in training approach may be motivated by perception of deteriorating dog behavior during adolescence, which does warrant further education into the importance of consistent rewards-based training. And as reporting behavior at earlier time points was a significant predictor of reporting problem behavior later at 12 months, it's important to create interventions early on and try to kind of support dog owners as early as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very interesting talk. Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm François Martin from Fiorina. Very interesting talk. There was a lot of information, so maybe I misunderstood something. Are you considering all positive punishment something aversive? Are you making that connection? Yeah. So
we do consider positive punishment as an aversive method.
But if I say no to my dog, so that's a positive punishment.
Yes.
You're saying this is aversive.
Yeah, so the reason why we used 3 kind of levels rather than just aversive, non-aversive, was to account for the fact that in our surveys, owners could differentiate between saying that they use physical reprimands or they say no to their dog. And technically, both of these approaches would be considered positive punishment, but we do recognize that there is a large difference between smacking your dog or saying no. So for this reason, instead of just dividing the responses into aversive, non-aversive, we've used this combination of numbers of categories that are technically classified as positive punishment or not.
Okay, well, I missed that. Thank you very much for clarifying this.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have another? Yes, there is another question just at the end.
Hi, Rachel Cadell from North Carolina State University. Great presentation. I was just wondering, since you do have the longitudinal data with these dogs, are you going to look at the effect of increasing that aversive punishment or aversive training methods and how that looks like on their, because they increase that during their adolescence, and then how that impacts them later in life? Is that something you plan to do?
Yes, definitely. But as you may know, with every time point in a longitudinal study, you have fewer and fewer dogs, and our cohort is still very young. So we still need to wait for probably several years before we have adequate sample size to carry out analysis that includes later time points. But we definitely would like to see that. And we also would like to evaluate the difference between owner-reported problem behavior and actual behavior reported in the survey, which is something that we're already working on. And my colleague Rachel has a poster, number 2, which kind of touches on this subject.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, thank you. You can move to the other room if you want. No question. I have myself a question. We are talking about training, but depending on the use of the dogs, people can be inconsistent in their wish of training, and even in a family, one can be completely crazy for a dog or his dog, and very strict for the other partner. So how you manage this inconsistently? Did you investigate it in your survey, and is it, in your opinion, important?
I do think it's very important. We do ask questions in the survey about a number of people kind of living in the household. So we perhaps could include that in further analysis and evaluate the kind of effect of family unit or family kind of structure and relation between that and risk factors, but we haven't included that in this analysis, but that's a good idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we can move now. We thank you very much, and we can move now to the next presentation. And for the next presentation will be from Suzanne Truong, if I pronounce it correctly.
That's right.
And it will be about pig response to different type of interaction with a human, free form versus imposed contact. So when you are ready.
I'm a bit short. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much for the kind introduction. And we've got a change of species now, so I'll be talking about pigs. And I guess we'll jump straight into it. And our project was kindly, thank you. Yes. Our project was kindly supported by the FWF Australian Science Fund. Okay. Before I get started, I'd like to get to know you all a little bit better. And this includes the audience online. So I have a question for you. Who here owns or has owned a pet? Don't be shy. Okay, yeah, that's as I expected, pretty much everyone in this room. And given that we're at an applied ethology conference, I gather that most of us also work directly with animals quite frequently. And I would assume that most of you, if not all, would agree that we're very lucky to be interacting with animals on a daily basis and be able to experience the many positive emotions with such interactions. Maybe some negative ones, but hopefully most of the time it's positive. Now, I want you to, for a moment, to just reflect on the interactions that you have with these animals. Do you encourage them to initiate, or do you initiate first? What exactly makes these interactions positive? Even though there are more and more studies demonstrating the effects of positive human-animal interactions on animal welfare, they have generally documented the overall effects and have overlooked the dynamics of what's actually happening during the interactions. And by overlooking the dynamic nature of interactions, we could be missing important information on what actually makes interactions qualify as positive. Now, why does this matter? Our aim is to investigate how pigs respond to different types of positive human-animal interactions. So for those of us who study positive human-animal interactions, it's important for us to ensure that the interactions we observe are indeed positive as perceived by the pig. So here we face our first dilemma. Typically, human-animal interaction paradigms used in research studies involve a human imposing some sort of standardized contact in a structured manner on the animal in an effort to have more experimental control. However, it's not clear whether these standardization of interactions produces findings that are comparable to the free-form interactions that we see in realistic contexts where animals can choose when and how to interact. I think it's very cute. So in this present study, we set out to compare two types of interactions, and these were our two test conditions. So free-form versus imposed contact. So we'll go over their key differentiating characteristics. Free-form is characterized by voluntary approach by the pig, whereas imposed contact, as the name suggests, is characterized by contact being imposed by the human. So on the one hand, the pig has the choice of when to interact, and on the other, she doesn't have so much this choice. Next, we have whether the human is responding or not responding to the solicitation of the pig. So this is intended to elicit a sense of perceived control or agency in the pig. And last but not least, free-form versus standardized contact given by the human. So when you combine these characteristics, the free-form condition is intended to be reminiscent of the way we interact with animals in a more realistic context, as opposed to the imposed contact condition, which is typical of a controlled, standardized experimental situation. So we'll take a look at how this looked in practice. Are you ready for some videos? So we'll take a look at the free-form condition first. As you can see here, the human used some visual and verbal cues to encourage the pig to come, and the pig could voluntarily approach and interact with the human. So you can see some scratches and some rubs, and yes, the pig is very cute again. And now we'll take a look at an example of the imposed contact condition. Before I play the video, I'll just quickly explain the procedure for this. So the human followed a standardized recorded sequence playing through wireless earbuds. And basically this was a series of contact and no contact bouts repeated 10 times over the 5-minute test session. She was not responsive to the pig and just followed the recording. So, okay, so we start with an off bout where no contact is given and the pig is ignored. And then we come to an on bout. So in this case, the pig was not within arm's reach. So the human had to approach her to apply the contact. And then the contact was a standardized stroking sequence. So it was a gentle stroke along the side of the body every 2 seconds. And they just do whatever they want to during that time. And then once that standardized stroking sequence is finished, then the human returns to that original location. And this sequence was repeated 10 times in the session. So that naturally leads us to our research question. Do pigs differ in their behavioral response to the different types of interaction? So this is a 3-part process. We'll first start looking at the typical measures of the pig's general behavioral response. And this will actually be the focus of my presentation because that's what we are currently analyzed. And then I will touch on reciprocity and synchrony at the end, which are our novel indicators of interaction quality. And for our hypothesis, we hypothesized that free-form interactions where pigs are allowed to voluntarily approach and interact in a free-form manner will foster higher engagement, as indicated by the pig spending more time in physical contact with the human and more behaviors indicating positive valence. So including approach behavior, tail wagging, and low frequency calls compared to when contact is imposed by the human. So let's move on to the methods. How do we run this experiment? So we ran 2 batches of 15 pigs, giving us a total of 30 pigs. On this slide, I've only shown 1 batch of 15 pigs, and this is a schematic layout of where they were housed. And as you can see here, there were 5 home pens and 1 test pen in the same room. We recruited the pigs at 5 weeks of age at weaning. We selected all female and selected them from 3 different litters. The pigs were housed in groups of 3, 1 from each litter, so the pens were balanced for litter. And we had the same familiar interacting human and the same handler for the duration of the trial. So let's have a look at a typical day at the farm for us. So the handler would go to collect the pig. And this was not always as easy as it looks because the pigs could be quite naughty. And once the pig was successfully moved into the test pen like so, then the familiar human would immediately walk to the test pen. So that would typically take her 10 to 15 seconds to do that. And then she would kneel down. So we habituated to the pigs to gentle, tactile and verbal contact with the familiar human in the test pen gradually across 3 weeks. And then we tested them in the 4th week when they were 9 weeks old. Okay, so for testing, we had a within subject design. So all pigs underwent both test conditions twice. Testing happened across 4 consecutive days, so 1 test per day, and this order was counterbalanced. So half the pigs would start with free form, the other half would start with imposed contact, and then each successive day they would alternate tests. The test sessions were 5 minutes each, and the pig's behavior was continuously recorded on video. And then we took these videos and conducted post hoc analysis. So for data analysis, we used an exhaustive ethogram to code the pig's behavior in Boris in order to conduct a time budget analysis of the pig's behavior during the tests. So this is just an excerpt of the activity category, which in total actually had 15 behaviors defined. So it's just to give you an idea. And now we'll have a look at some preliminary results. For the preliminary results, this was based on our data for days 1 and 2 of testing. So that gives us a pair of 1 of each test for each pig. And we used a generalized linear mixed effects model in R, where we had test as a fixed effect and pig ID as a random effect. We tested pairwise comparisons using estimated marginal means. And we'll start with looking at contact by pig because this was our indicator of engagement. Interestingly, there was no significant difference with the amount of time the pig spent actively making physical contact with a human between the test types. But behaviors where there was a significant difference between test types included withdrawing, where the pig spent more time moving away from the human in the imposed contact condition, and exploring environment, where the pig spent more time exploring the pen in the free-form condition. With regards to tail posture and tail movement, we found no significant difference between the test types. And for the vocalization data, I'm still working on analyzing this data. I would be cautious to draw strong conclusions from these results because it's not our complete data set, but these results do suggest that the nature of these 2 types of interactions does influence the pig's activity during the test sessions. So that means different types of interactions could produce different outcomes with consequences that perhaps are unintended, especially if the data suggests a difference in underlying affective state. For example, exploring is typically associated with positive affective states, and withdrawing is typically associated with negative affective states. So that is something to consider. So what's next for us? If you remember earlier, I mentioned our analysis is a 3-part process, including the novel indicators, reciprocity and synchrony. So reciprocity looks at the responsiveness between the pig and the human. And for this, we'll be looking at behavioral transitions and sequences, and we'll also be tackling the question of contingency. As for synchrony, we'll be looking at this in terms of physical touch. So do the pig and the human match when they touch, or is there sort of a leader or follower relationship? So these are just a few of the many questions we have yet to answer. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. I'd like to quickly give special thanks to everyone that made this project possible. Again, to our funders, FWF, and of course, our piggies. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for this nice talk. Do you have any question? Yes, 2 questions, 2 persons.
Yeah, hi. Good. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I was just wondering, maybe you mentioned that I may have missed it. Did you habituate the pigs to the testing area first?
Yes, so that was the 3 weeks of habituation from the time of weaning till testing. So we had 3 weeks of gradual habituation where we started in groups and then we got them used to going individually, and this all happened in the test pen. So they should have been ready by week 4 to be alone interacting with the newly human in the test pen. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Bjørn Falkman from Denmark. I was just wondering, you said that free form is the most common interaction with animals, and I think that may be true for dogs or cats, etc. But for our farm animals, don't we impose our contact with them to a much larger extent?
Yes. So I don't believe I said, yeah, I did. I said that we typically see free form interactions with our domestic animals. But yes, of course, you're correct that there are a lot of farm animals that are not so lucky, I would say, and restrained for particular reasons. Are those the situations you're talking about, like confinement and where the handlers or the stock people impose contact?
Yeah, I mean, even just, I mean, when you move sows or you move piglets or all those typical things we do with our farm animals, where we don't usually not let them take the initiative, but rather say, all right, time to move the cow. It's milking time, or whatever.
I guess I would say for this particular study, we actually intended on focusing on positive interactions with the human. And the research question, we removed the word positive because it's positive as perceived by the human, but we can't actually say, which is why we're investigating it. So yes, you're correct. In those situations, there would probably be more neutral or negative interactions with the human. But yeah.
Thank you.
I hope that makes sense.
Okay, you can move to the other room if you want. Here.
Adroaldo Zanella, University of São Paulo.
Yeah.
Exciting work. What I'm concerned is the state of mind of the person doing the work. When you're there as a kind of a let the pig do the job, the other one you're following commands. You think the subjective experience of the handler could have biased the results? Because in fact you have one handler for both. And what I'm concerned is that, I mean, if I'm doing the work and I'm as a part of a free spirit sitting there and let the pig do the job is one thing, but if I'm with a near device and getting orders how to do, I don't know, I may not be as interesting to the pig. That's what I found the most fascinating, at the same time challenge part of your study.
Do you mean the nature of whether you're responsive to the pig?
Yeah, the nature of you, how do you feel at that point? I mean, the whole expression, because the pig is reading you much more than what you want. And in one place you're there letting the pig do the job, and the other you're being told what to do. You know, I don't know. It gives a level of subjectivity I had no idea you could control by having lots of people asking how do they feel about doing that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. For the human itself, themselves, it would feel different being in the two different conditions, right? I guess that's the question of standardized experimental conditions where you follow procedures and you don't think about how you're acting to the pig and whether you're being responsive. And that's sort of what we're comparing, is how the pig is responding to the signals that we're giving to them. And it is different by nature. So that's what we wanted to see, if there is an underlying difference in the affective state for that. But
I'm sorry, we have to stop.
Yeah, okay.
And to
That's
switch.
a good question though. Thank you.
Thank you very much for. So, our next speaker will talk about horses. I want to present you Léa Guiguen from France. And she will talk about tactile reactivity in equids, challenges and factors of influence. So, when you want.
Good afternoon. I'm Leah, and I'm a PhD student in Rennes University. So before to start, I apologize for my poor English. So I'm pleased to present you a study about the tactile reactivity of liquids. First of all, it is important to know that among sensory modality, tactile is the first to be developed in utero, and it is a lot of present in the daily life of most animal species because there are various roles. And tactile sensory modality is more or less involved in social life, which some species, there are a lot of contact during social interaction. And in other species, it limits it to contact between juvenile and parent, for example, or occasional allogrooming sequences. Like horses, which in tactile interaction represent a small part of the time budget. But curiously, during human-horses interaction, there are a lot of tactile interaction on ground with grooming, for example, or on work with equipment or rider actions. And actually, we don't know how horses perceive human action. Just one study showed among 69 horses, 5% show relaxation behavior, and 21% show an aggressive behavior during activity of grooming. And it is also important to do the difference between sensitivity and reactivity, because it is possible to perceive a stimuli, but don't react to it. And actually, that we know really about tactile sensory of liquid is that horses have a very thin skin, and they are able to react to subtle stimuli. So horses appear to have an interesting model to study the impact of intra and extrinsic factors on tactile reactivity. And that's why we decided to do the literature review on this subject with two keywords for the first time, tactile and liquid. And then we keep only studies using the same tool, Von Frey filament. And we keep only 17 studies who correspond our criteria. So Von Frey filament is initially used to test the perception of human skin. It's composed by a rigid plastic body prolonged by a nylon thread of different thicknesses. User applies perpendicularly to the subject skin the filament, and when the filament bends, the pressure of the filament stops. So this tool have many advantages, because it is possible to apply that to all species, all parts of the body, and the pressure is constant and standardized. And it is easy to implement this method. So among our 17 studies, we look at factor intra and extrinsic factors are cited, and the link was the link with tactile reactivity was made. So, for example, concerning the factors of the sex, 4 studies cited and tested this factor. One study showed that geldings are more reactive than males, and 3 other studies don't show a difference between males and geldings. So it is difficult to conclude with the contradictory results. Regarding the factors of the age, 2 studies converge with show the tactile reactivity decreases with age. Now, concerning more particularly welfare condition, one study showed that horses living in enriched condition are less tactile reactivity compared to horses living in impoverished conditions. And one study interests more particularly to the depressed state of horses and show that these horses are a lower tactile reactivity compared to other horses. Moreover, we also find a lot of methodological discrepancies between this study. For example, this study tests horses in different seasons, or we know that air density varied of horses during the season. And the filament size used and body area tested is also differ between study, but we know that the perception of horses are able to perception very subtitle stimuli, and their skin sensitivity varies according to the distribution of sensory nerve receptor. So to conclude of this first part, we show that there are some point convergence between study with a strong perception of very subtitle tactile stimuli and a possible decrease of reactivity with age, maybe due to the experience or the habituation of horses. But there are few factors that don't tested, like the tip of the work or the impact of the test of the season. And the sex, the impact of the sex diverge between two studies, maybe due to the methodological discrepancies. So to test the relevance of this factor, we decide to do a pilot study to see the impact of few of these factors. To that, we tested 8 ponies and 8 horses living in the same naturalistic living condition, little or not work, and we test these horses 2 times at 6 months intervals, first session in January and second session in June. For that, we applied 4 different filament size on the right and on the left side of horses, on the withers, the chest, and the stifle, and to see if horses react to the filament. We watch if there are a skin tremor like horses do to chasing flies. Concerning the result, we do a statistical model and we have 4 major results. First of all, we show that the session have an impact because horses react more at the second session in June compared to the first session, revealing no habituation, but either sensitization or seasonal effect. Second, the tip of equids have also an impact because horses react more than ponies living in the same condition and revealing possible differences according to the type or the breed. The filament size is also important because horses react more to the large filament compared to the thin filament. And finally, it's also important to take account the areas tested because horses react more at the withers than other body areas, so the stifle and the chest. Moreover, we decide to see if among these factors, one of them are more stable between the 2 sessions. And we see that the area of the chest is more stable compared to the withers or the stifle. So it is important to take this information in account for the methodological for future studies. To conclude of this study, we see that we are still far to have a complete view of the impact of intra and extrinsic factors on the tactile reactivity of horses. And the sensory world of horses is still poorly known. And tactile sensitivity may be underestimated with the riding action, the grooming, etc., etc. And it's possible that there are an overestimation of a general positive balance of human tactile action on horses. And moreover, it is possible to have difference of this perception according to the season. And moreover, no work, actually there are no work on the type of activity of horses on the tactile reactivity, but actually there one study in preparation and this study show that there are higher tactile reactivity in equids involved in equine assisted intervention. So the activity, it is also important to take account when we have contact with horses. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this clear talk. Do you have any question? Yes, please.
Very interesting talk. Thank you so much for that.
I
was really interested in your results. I really love that you're asking this question, and context is so important with horses. So how did you control for that in the experiment? Because perhaps the relationship between the handler and the person and with the horse for the person doing the test may influence the horse's interpretation, whether this is threatening or this is pleasurable.
For all horses, there are 2 persons during the test, 1 person with the filament and 1 person, all the horses with a lunge, and the 2 persons for all horses is an unfamiliar person.
Thank you.
Do you have another question? I have a question myself. Is there a difference between skin sensory feeling and tactile stimulation? Because in your presentation, you use something to test skin sensitivity, but we are talking also about tactile stimulation. Is it the same or not?
It is important to know the differences between reactivity and sensitivity. The stimulation is just the touch of the filament on the skin, but the reactivity is the behavior response, while the sensitivity is an internal state. Horses can perceive the stimuli, but don't react to it. In the study, we just see the reaction and not the sensitivity.
My question was more about tactile and skin sensitivity. What about pressure receptors, for example, that could be involved in tactile stimulation, which is maybe different from skin sensitivity?
I don't know. There are few little study about the sensitivity of horses. Is just the react. To study the sensitivity would be work with an EEG case, for example, or other, but I don't know.
Okay, some questions? Yes, please. Just here. What is the microphone? So.
Thank you. You compare ponies and horses.
Yes.
Is there any plan to compare different breeds of horses?
Yes, there are a lot of breeds of horses, but we don't test the effect of the breed because they are don't an important size of breed to test statistical. But in this few studies, there are an impact indeed of breed with horses, full-breded horses are more reactive compared to other. But in this study, I don't know.
Okay, you can switch to the other room if you want at the moment. Do you have another question? I have again myself one. You say that time budget for tactile stimulation in horses is quite low.
Yes.
This is not, is it general perception or can be different depending on the individuals and depending affinities between two individuals? So that it means that it's low, but if you consider individual relationships, that could be high for some individuals.
Yes. In general, there are low tactile interaction in horses in general, but tactile interaction allow us to find the affinity between horses. Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we will change the spaces, discussing about calves. And we have the pleasure to listen Maya Bertelsen. And she will talk about the weaning method of dam-reared dairy calves affects their response to humans during an arena test. Thank you very much.
Should I do something from up here? Yeah, I don't see my presentation. All right. So thank you for the presentation. And I'll be telling you about the human-animal relationship of dairy calves that are reared either artificially by humans or by their dam. And importantly, how the weaning method affected our results. So like a lot of you people here, we are studying dam rearing of dairy calves in the hopes of improving the welfare of both the cows and the calves. I'm focusing on the calves though. And for those, we have also seen some studies showing that they, when reared by their dam, have a poor human-animal relationship. So this might have an impact on their welfare as they are in a production system with humans around. And studies have suggested that it might be the presence of the dam during human contact that actually prevents socialization towards humans. So we were curious as to whether a half-time contact system between the calves and their dam would allow for a period of the day without the dam being present, where they could experience human interaction, which might improve their human-animal relationship compared to a full-time contact system with the dam and a control group. So our aim was to investigate the effect of daily dam contact duration on the human-animal relationship of dairy calves. And our primary hypothesis was, based on other studies, that a control group that were artificially reared would have the most positive human-animal relationship, that full-time calves would have the least positive, and then that half-time might be intermediate. We also had a secondary hypothesis, which was based on a different research question where we had two different weaning treatments, a simultaneous weaning and separation treatment, and a stepwise weaning and separation treatment, where we expected calves on a simultaneous treatment to be more stressed at the time of testing and therefore have an overall poor human-animal relationship. So to give you a quick overview of the experimental design for each block, we started out with 12 calves and their cows, which we distributed on these 3 different contact treatments. So we had 4 calves in each of the 3 pens. And for control calves, they were separated from the dam just after birth, so the cows left the study. And then we also had the weaning treatments. So here we had within each of the contact treatments 2 different weaning treatments. So this amounted to a total of 6 treatment combinations to compare. We repeated this 6 times. So we had 6 blocks and a total of 72 calves tested. And to tell a little bit more about the experimental design, here we have a schematic overview of the barn. With green, you see the full-time cows and their calves. So they're together for all day, except for 1 hour a day where the cows are waiting to be milked, half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the afternoon, where the calves are just left behind in this pen. Then we have the halftime here with red. They're together during the day hours between the 2 daily milkings. But after the afternoon milking, the cows are kept in another barn and for the night. And then they come back when they're milked in the morning, then they come back to their calves. So they're together for 10 hours a day. And lastly, we have a control group that were separated after birth. And this control group are receiving milk twice a day. They get it from teat buckets where they can drink to satiation. So they drank approximately 12 liters per calf per day, which is approximately the ad libitum intake of a calf of this age. All calves also had access to the cow's feed, to calf concentrate, hay, and water ad libitum. So this was the first 8 weeks. And then at week 8, we started the 2 different weaning treatments. So here, 2 calves within each treatment pen were now weaned of milk. For the dam-reared calves, full-time and half-time, that meant that 2 calves were put in one of the calf creeps that we had in the corner of the home pens. And here they still had access to the cows in a sense that they could see each other, they could touch each other, but they could not suckle. For the control calves, it was not really possible to do true stepwise weaning since they were already separated from their dams earlier, but 2 of them were at this point in time weaned off milk. Right. And then we had them like that for 1 week. That was the first step of the weaning. And then at week 9, we had the final step where the cows were moved out of the barn. The calves were moved to weaning pens in the groups of calves that they knew. And then this meant that the last calves didn't receive milk anymore. So at this point in time, within each treatment pen, we had 2 calves that had stepwise weaning and separation and 2 calves that had the simultaneous weaning and separation. And this leads us to when we did the human-animal relation test. So that was 1 week after this final step. And we used this elongated arena to do an animal approach test where the test person placed him or herself at a 4-meter distance from the calf. And then the calf had 3 minutes to do whatever it wanted. And we looked at its latency to first approach towards the test person, whether or not it approached within 1 meter of the test person, and whether it would sniff the test person or not. Okay, so let's go to some results here. And overall, for these 3 response variables, we had an interaction between the contact treatment and the weaning treatment that was significant. So I will start out by talking about the contact treatment, which was only differences of the contact treatment within one of the weaning treatments being the stepwise weaning. So whenever we look at these graphs here, please focus on the yellow shaded area. That's what we're talking about now. And then we'll talk about simultaneous weaning in a moment. So this first graph is the latency to first approach, where we have the shortest latency in the top of the y-axis and increasing as we go down. And for the yellow shaded area here, we see that control have a shorter latency to first approach the test person than full-time calves did, and half-time are actually numerically in between, but not statistically different from the 2 others. Moving on to the next response variable, we had whether or not they approached within 1 meter. And this is a binary response variable, so we have probabilities on the y-axis. And again, looking at the yellow shaded area, so the stepwise weaning, control had a higher probability of coming in close than full-time did, and half-time were numerically in between. For the last response variable, we have sniffing the test person. And here, unfortunately, I had to combine half-time and full-time into one treatment level because there was very low response variables for the dam-reared calves. So they are combined into one called dam-reared. But the overall picture here is the same, that control calves have a higher probability of sniffing the test person than dam-reared calves did. So to sum up and conclude on this primary hypothesis on the effect of the contact treatment, so whether they were control full-time or half-time, under stepwise weaning and separation, we confirmed the results of other, that control calves have the most positive human-animal relationship, full-time has the least positive human-animal relationship. Half-time calves were intermediate numerically, but not statistically so. This might have to do with the fact that we had 12 animals in each of the treatment combinations, so a larger study might have been able to detect differences here. Another option could be to have an actual active positive handling session of the calves rather than just a period of the day where they could experience humans through normal management procedures. That would be interesting to look further into. But we did also have the secondary hypothesis, and I already kind of disclosed that there would be something there to look at. So we expected the simultaneously weaned calves to be under higher weaning stress and thus have a pure human-animal relationship than stepwise. But what we got, and this is the same 3 graphs as you've already seen, nothing new here, except that I combined the observation points with a line between stepwise and simultaneous. So we expected to see a shift down in the pink shaded area across all of the contact treatments, like this arrow, because we expected this poor human-animal relationship overall. And as you can see, that only really holds true for the from the control treatment calves. They reacted as we expected, whereas for the dam-reared, especially the full-time calves, we actually saw the opposite reaction. We saw a relatively more positive human-animal relationship, at least as interpreted from these response variables. That was quite curious, and we expect that to have to do with weaning stress. So we looked at one other response variable we had, which was the vocalization count during the test period. And here we do see that definitely something is happening with the dam-reared calves under the simultaneous weaning treatment. This is 1 week after they were weaned from the dam and milk at one time. And here the dam-reared calves are calling a lot more than the control calves, and also than dam-reared calves on the stepwise treatment. However, we don't feel like this, even though it might be a representation of hunger or calling for the dam, we don't feel like it explains these opposite directed behavioral changes. So future studies could look into investigating what the driving mechanism is behind the opposite directed behavior changes for control and dam-reared calves respectively. A suggestion could maybe be if the simultaneous weaning and separation from the dam is introducing a sort of sensitive period for these calves, which actually makes them more interested in social context, even with humans. That would also mean that this would be a great period in the production to actually intensify contact to improve the benefits of a positive human-animal relationship. So I'll round out here with some perspectives in future work. We've seen that it is indeed important to take into account weaning stress when testing human-animal relation in calves. Had we not looked at the stepwise weaning procedure and only the simultaneous, we would not have been able to confirm the results of others. And it would be really interesting to investigate and understand the driving mechanisms behind these opposite reactions to weaning stresses seen between the dam-reared and the artificially reared calves. Thank you so much for your time and interest. Thanks for staying here, even though there's coffee out there. And an extra thank you to Julie Jonsson and Laura Walling, who helped with discussing this data at an early stage. Yes, thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much for this very interesting talk. Yes, we have already one question.
Thank you very much. I'm Megan Hain from the States, just for background, but my question is whether you looked at cortisol levels and whether that had something to do with that sort of opposite response that you were seeing there. Thanks.
I wish, but no, unfortunately, we don't have any cortisol measurements, but it would have been very nice to support what's happening here, definitely.
Okay, so we have a question from Suzanne.
Thank you, Maya, for this nice talk. Maybe I missed it, but did you describe the human contact they had? Because in the abstract book, it seems that control animals just had more contact to humans. So it's not surprising. So it's not the mother that then changes something, but the amount of contact.
So definitely the control calves, they were fed milk in teat buckets by humans that arrived with the milk. So in that sense, they would have a positive experience around humans approaching. So that's also why it is not unexpected to see the results we did under the stepwise weaning treatment that was confirming the results of others. But I still don't think it explains why they should then have a relatively poorer human-animal relationship when they were abruptly weaned in a simultaneous manner.
Okay.
I think we should discuss further.
Okay, do you have another question? Okay, there is a question here, just here behind the pot.
Thank you for a nice presentation. Lena Lidfors from Sweden. I was wondering if you could see that the stepwise weaned calves showed more stress after the weaning due to that they got used to the the routine that their mother would return every day.
So you're thinking the dam reared calves while they were in the creeps, where the mother would come and go?
Yes.
Yes. We do have vocalization and movement counts at that time that hasn't been analyzed yet. But we definitely see that their reaction to being weaned is also to a large extent happening then while in this pen within the dam's environment, and then to a lesser extent when they are being moved again. So they're separating their weaning reaction into those two periods. So yes, there are some stress early on for the stepwise wean calves. It's a longer time since maybe they experience the stress when we test them.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Another question? I have a question myself. It seems there is a huge variability among calves in your different groups. And I was wondering if you have been interested by the mother reaction and the mother-human relationships that could explain this individual relationship, and particularly during the weaning process, where at the moment you need to have interaction in the same time with the calf and the dam. And in beef cattle, it has been demonstrated that that would have another effect, but in horses too. So I wanted to know what you have done about that.
Yes, unfortunately, no, I didn't really look at the cows in this experiment. I have other colleagues that are focusing more on the cows, luckily. I definitely think it would be interesting to look at whether there's a genetic component and also just the dam's experiences and her human-animal relationship, whether that sort of has a rub off on the calf, and which could be expected. And I think that would be more maybe pronounced in a situation where we had an active handling session of the calves in the presence of or not in the dam, rather than this situation where it was only management procedures that they experienced with or without the dam present.
Okay, thank you very much. So we can switch to the next part of this session, when we will have short presentation of the posters. So I invite the person who have to present their posters. Thank you very much for the talk. I invite the person who have a poster to present, if you can just, because it will succeed very quickly. So if you can just approach to be ready for the 1 minute talk, which is a good exercise. And Suzanne is starting.
Okay, welcome to the presentation of our study on behavior and health of horses used in equine assisted intervention and associated factors. We invited around 800 institutions to take part in an online questionnaire, and we got 133 responses to analyze. And the regression models revealed that there were less health problems if horses had more access to pasture, if there was lower workload in terms of more holiday weeks, lower clients per day, and a shorter duration of the therapy sessions, and leisure activities as well as attitudes had an effect as well. Regarding behavioral problems, they were very rarely mentioned. The most often mentioned by 17% of institutions was biting the therapist or trainer, which was also less, with lower workload and less negative attitudes. And the training methods had an effect as well. And if you want to hear more, then please come to poster 13.
Very good, thank you very much.
Hello, everybody.
We have nothing on the screen.
I sent my presentation is relationship with the evaluate the welfare of horses and mules using a validated protocol that evaluates animal-based indicators. We use 200 animals from the Colombian coffee growing region that were evaluated by the direct observation of health and behavioral parameters. Horses and mules demonstrated friendly behavior in front of the evaluators. The higher percent of the animal exhibited healthy body condition score and a lower proportion presented health problems. The results suggest that owners are concerned about the welfare of their animals, and it is essential to develop training programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. The objective of this study was to assess whether pigs are reassured by the human in a stressful event, having previously developed a positive relationship of the human by observing a socially dominant or subordinate demonstrator pig building a positive human-pig relationship. To prove this, 75 pigs were assigned to one of the three treatments: dominant demonstrator group and subordinate demonstrator group, who observed a high and low socially ranked on a specific demonstrator, receiving gently stroking twice a day for 5 weeks, and control group, who received minimal human contact. Then, the behavioral reaction of the animal was evaluated in a social support test consisting in a physical restraint in a cage for 3 minutes while the human stroked the animals. Pigs exposed to demonstrator show less restlessness reaction and remain cold for longer compared to control group. In conclusion, human can reassure pigs during stressful events by using social learning.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Emma Fàbrega and I work at IRTA, a research institute in Catalonia. In poster number 16, we are going to present on behalf of our colleague Diane Teixeira some initial results on the effects of either a positive, negative or neutral human-animal interaction context on tear staining and body temperature in weaned piglets. Our main findings have been an effect on both higher temperature in positively and negatively treated 100 piglets in tail temperature, but I do not want to make a spoiler. Please come to our poster and then we can discuss a bit further on these results. And I would just like to use my last 20 seconds on saying that this data was collected in combination of a European project called PigWeb, in which different research institutes, and some colleagues are here, are trying to harmonize methods to collect samples and also observe behaviors to evaluate pig welfare.
Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. John and I did a poster which was a systematic review of studies of chicken welfare at catching and the risk of bias. So we assessed more than 9,000 papers and only 22 studies met the review criteria, which was comparing different methods of catching. And it's actually surprisingly that there is so little literature on such a common practice. Some of the highlights, and of course you can find more of the highlights on the poster, but we found that inverting hens and broilers induces higher levels of fear compared to not inverting, which is not surprising. We also found that dead on arrival appears to be quite a confounded welfare indicator for mechanical catching. And if you want to find out why, then come and see us. We also want to just point out that all the studies that we looked at had potential sources of bias. So we think that they need to be interpreted with caution. But then on the other hand, there's huge potential to improve chicken welfare at catching with good scientific studies. We are poster number 17 in poster room number 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
hello everyone. Imagine you would be an animal living in a social group. There are a lot of things you have to deal with in your daily life. So for example, you need information about possible food locations, about the presence of predators, or about social interactions that are among your group members. And it would be very good if you could socially acquire those information. So you can, if you use gaze following, which is the ability of looking where others are looking. So in our study, we tested 2 domestic species, goats and llamas, and 2 non-domesticated species, guanacos and muflons. And we tested whether they are able to follow the gaze of their conspecifics and also of a human experimenter. So on the right, you can see what the setup looked like, for example, in a conspecific task. In the back, we have the model, and in the front, we have the subject that was tested. And the second picture, you can see that the model looked to the side and thus gave a cue. And if you want to see if the tested individual was able to follow the gaze, yeah, come and see my poster number 18.
Thank you very much. The last one.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine Music, and I'm a PhD student at McGill University. Have you ever wondered what we can do to improve the human-animal relationship of movement-restricted dairy cows in Canada? I know that I have. We've found in past research that allowing cattle to go outdoors for 5 days a week had positive effects on their reactivity to humans. But it's not always easy or practical for Canadian producers to allow their animals to go outside that often. So do we still see those same benefits if we allow our animals to go at lower frequencies, such as 3 times a week or even once a week? Well, our research has shown that allowing cows to go outdoors, regardless of the frequency of outing, had positive benefits on their reactivity to humans, even showing long-term effects. But wait, there's more. You can come visit me at poster number 19 to find out how outdoor access impacts other aspects of cow reactivity and to find out how it makes a brave cow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are at the end of the session. It was particularly interesting. I hope you enjoy it too. And now it's time for the break, I think. Thank you very much. There is still one presentation online. I miss it.
Sorry, just 1 second. Just to inform you, can you напустите го на моето slide? Just 1 second regarding the posters, because there are some complications with online and short talks and everything. Please visit the place where the link with the Zoom for Zoom for posters. There are breaking rooms inside where actually people could go inside here in the breakout rooms where each person who is a presenting author is having its own room. So all the rooms that are for today are active now. So the number of people that are visiting this link will keep this link alive or not. So if you don't have a presentation here, your presentation is online, or you are participating online, or also even if you are physically present here, please go to your breakout rooms. Maybe there will be someone who will enter to your room and you can discuss about your poster and about your work. So please do it, and I will remind you about that later. Wine and cheese tasting event, it will start at all that are registered. We will wait for you at 7:30 in front of the hotel. There will be buses to the place. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm coming. Thank you.